will ask me to kind of, make this kind of curation for documentaries. I was very happy because for a long time there was this concern that we are showing so many fiction films and so many wonderful documentaries which are being made in India, and then we have to also celebrate documentaries. And thank you for giving this kind of opportunity to bring these films, because I really feel that documentary as a form has evolved in last uh, kind of couple of decades, and there are some wonderful documentaries made by Indian documentary filmmakers, and they are not being seen by most of the people because there are no platforms which showcase documentaries. There are no channels in India, so all that is there, and so we are, as an audience, we are really not being able to reach out to these wonderful films that which are being made by our own filmmakers. So this is a great opportunity which is created. I'm sure in next year also we'll have like maybe a longer program and something more serious about documentaries. But thank you so much. So Anupama and Kuldeep, both of them are my very good friends. Anupama is my senior from Film Institute, and so I know her for the last 25 years. And she's making films what she believed in always. Like, she never kind of made films because someone wants her to make something, and so she had kept her voice intact for these years. So I would like to ask you, like, how about your journey from FTI, and then how was your like film journey, and then we'll come to Nocturnes later.
Yeah, thank you, Umesh. Yeah, it's indeed lovely that documentaries are being featured in a very lovely and respectful way at this festival, because it's always been a sort of, you always treated as the lesser cousins often in some festivals. So it's nice that here we feel respected. So I think that's very important. So as you know, I studied in FTI with you, which is a primarily fiction course in which documentaries are hardly sort of taught at all, or they're really sort of, that's the exercise we used to take most likely among all the exercises we did there. But I had a prior sort of engagement with documentary when I was in college. So my introduction to nonfiction filmmaking was when I was doing applied math. So as electives, I had taken nonfiction filmmaking. So I had that little bit of introduction before FTI. And after FTI, strangely, I decided to go right back to documentaries, primarily because of wanting to be totally having my own creative freedom. And this was in 2001 when I finished from FTI. And so at that time, it seemed like if I had to make fiction, then it would be like, 10 years of assisting and, Bombay and just this big bad world, which I would have had to negotiate. Whereas with documentaries, I was like, I got to make my first film within like 6 months after graduating. And I was in total control. I could do exactly what I wanted. So, and that has sort of been the most valuable and important thing for me, is that whatever the budget is, whatever the scale is, how can I do what I want to and the way I want to do it. So I think there can not be any compromise there. So that's been sort of the main sort of impetus of my journey as a filmmaker. So chota hai, bada hai, whatever the film is, So I made films which are like really small, in which I did everything: camera, direction, editing, production, everything. And there was like one person holding the boom, and wo bhi banaya hai. And so it's been that kind of thing of using cinema as a medium. And I think where the FTI and the fiction part comes in is not to make a distinction, like aap cinema bana rahe ho to cinema bana rahe ho, whatever form it might take. Like yesterday we saw their film, which was, well, yeah, documentary, it's animation, but it's also fiction, it's also poetry. So it's like, why limit ourselves? So in that sense, in every film, the attempt has been is that I may be making a documentary, but I'm as inspired by any fiction filmmaker, by the masters, so or by music, or so all those things are still available. So as a documentary filmmaker, you don't have to feel कि आपको सिर्फ न्यूज से इंस्पिरेशन लेना है या आपको सिर्फ इंटरव्यूज करने हैं या वॉइस ओवर डालना है. So all the things, painting, everything is as much inspiring for me as a fiction filmmaker. And that has been sort of the gift of that training in fiction, that you don't feel like your path is determined only by that documentary word. So you're a cinema maker and you have chosen to make documentaries. So that's been also very crucial in my journey, and especially in the last 10 years when Anirban and I started working together, is when there was this idea of imagining bigger films, bigger in the sense of the number of days of shoot, in terms of the budgets, in terms of where you want the film to reach. But then that will sort of soon lead to Nocturnes, but so maybe we'll come to it in a bit. Yeah.
But tell us about your films before Nocturnes, like
Okay.
all kind of your like film journey.
Right. So some of the films are, I made a film called I Wonder, which I called my documentary film school, which I made it in 2008-9. So that's the one in which I just shot, I did everything myself. And it was about children in 3 rural areas in India, in Rajasthan, in Bikaner, and in Sikkim, it was in West Sikkim, and in Tamil Nadu, it was in Rameshwaram. So I wanted to go to the most extreme extremities of the nation, so to speak, and see what are we giving a sort of average government school, what is the education that we are offering. Because जब भी हम लोग कहीं गांव में जाते हैं, so one question that we often ask everybody is कि आप स्कूल जाते हो, आपके बच्चे स्कूल जाते हैं, as if that's like the way to enhance your life in some way. And so my quest was that, yeah, we are asking this, we feel it's a good thing for children to go to school, but what exactly is happening in these schools? And what is happening outside the schools? And what is that relation? So it was, and I was like, okay, I'm not interested in adults. I'm only going to spend all my time with kids because I really enjoy that. So that whole journey was like with me, my camera, and this exploration of these spaces and the lives of children. So for me, that was my second film school. In a way कि अब मैं जो मर्जी मैं करूँगी, कोई मुझे बताएगा नहीं, मुझे किसी को समझाने की जरूरत नहीं है कि शॉट कैसा लेना है, क्या करना है. And because I shot that film myself, and then I edited it, so that was my training, because just by looking at what you shot, you also understand yourself better. And then that time you're not answering to anybody. You don't have to explain to your teacher or your funder or your camera person or your editor. It's just you and the material. And for me, that was one of the most sort of useful and critical experiences of my life, in which I got the confidence, yeah, I can do this, I don't need to have 10 people crew or 100 people crew and have. I don't want to be a people manager. I was like, cinema is not about managing people. So I wanted to make that distinction, and I'm very inspired by Iranian cinema from Abbas Kiarostami, and there was this sense like, how can you make films like you would write poetry? And even though it's a more industrial medium, can you still bring that aesthetic? And so that was sort of my journey before I became a bit more industrial now. Yeah.
And after this film, then you get making like other documentaries.
Yeah, then after that, actually, I had some health issues and so on, so I couldn't travel. So then I collaborated with Pushpa Rawat, who was my student and who assisted me on I Wonder. And then, after she was part of many workshops with me and so on. And so I wanted her to make a film. And so she made this film called Nirnay, in which I'm the co-director and the editor and mentor and so on. And so that was a film in which she explored her own milieu and the lives of her women friends. So that film we made in a workshop mode. So every time, like she would, and those were like mini DVDs. So she was a one-person crew going into her, family, friends with this tinier camera. So it was a zero budget film basically. So she would and I would sort of give my editing machine, and I had given her the camera, and I would buy the tapes, and then she would come every 3-4 months to my place. We would watch the footage, we would discuss it. I would say, "Ye kyun kiya Pushpa? Aise kyun kiya? And ye bahut acha hai." And we were just doing a fun thing. And after 2 years, we were like, okay, there's something interesting going on here. because there was something about the lives of women that was coming through very strongly, about how the decisions, the key decisions of their lives uh, are made by somebody else, and they are somehow giving up that space to either their parents or their husband or their in-laws. And so the whole film became an exploration of that. And then we had PSBT came on board at that point with some funding, and then we edited it. And then when we shared that film, that was again a very, very crucial part of my journey, because the kind of response that film got, like even today it's shown in educational institutions and colleges, in all kind of NGOs and everything, because it has that resonance, because it's made by a person from her own milieu. It was not me going to her house and asking, young women, oh, aap kya karte ho? And it's not that gaze. It was like she was asking a friend out of genuine concern for her life. And so that gaze and that quest became very different from what we normally see. When we see urban, upper middle class people going into rural areas or going into, underprivileged sections and bringing that kind of elitist gaze. So that was, it was very interesting to see that a film can be made like that too, in which it is, it has a kind of cinematic rigor of its own, and its strength comes from this unique positionality of the filmmaker.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I definitely feel that this whole complete independence and not really like wanting to kind of have 10, 15, 20 people, a lot of money to make. You don't need all of that, and you can actually make your own film, and it can be a documentary. And there's hardly any kind of, it's a very thin line between a fiction and a documentary. So what is a documentary and what is fiction? Is this idea is very blurred. So I just want to know from you how you have seen this transition from like in the form of documentary in last 20 years. What if you can also give some examples, because you have been to lots of documentary film festivals. So for like names that kind of are important for you, and how this transition, and do you think that it has, how the form has changed?
So that's a complicated question, because in a way it has changed, and in a way there have actually been many films that were experimenting before also. Like, for example, the film on Narayan Survey. That was like a docu-fiction. The one which Manjira Datta made on Akka Mahadevi. That was, that had actors, but it was still documentary. So those kind of films were made even by the previous generations of filmmakers. The major shift that's happened, I think, now is that documentaries are getting a lot of more international attention. I think that's a big shift. And that has come, and it's been a process. So in the initial days, there was this sense that when the digital technology came and when it became possible, if I want to make a film on you and I befriend you, suppose I didn't know you, but I befriend you because, and then we get along and you give me that access. The access became then this crucial word. You give me access, and so I can then just come and sit in your house and film everything that's happening. So then that became one kind of documentary. And then that was very interesting for people to see, because it was like, oh, I can see, like, oh, you're fighting with your best friend, you're fighting with your partner, whatever, and then whatever you're doing in your life, it's all like visible and it's very intimate, and that kind of thing one hadn't seen in those other kind of documentaries made earlier. A lot of them, some you had, but so this became like a norm. And a lot of films were made like that, including in India. And then but that had this issue of voyeurism, because it was like that access was almost too much, and where do you draw the line? So, and then there was a lot of questions about ethics and what's okay to do and what's not, and how and what is consent in this, because many times you're filming people who don't know how that footage can be used, and just because you're nice to them and they're getting attention, they're like, oh, somebody actually cares that my life is important enough to be filmed, and nobody gave a damn about it earlier. So that was such a validation that nothing else mattered. But then later, of course, with everybody becoming so much more media literate, so like the era when if you went to a basti with a camera, everybody would come running. But now everybody has their own cameras, everybody has their own phone. So that charm and that myth has gone now. So now it's a different phase. So I think, so in terms of documentaries in India, I think now there is a phase in which, because a lot of funding is coming from outside, we are able to imagine higher budget films, because there's absolutely zero budget in India, zero money in India for docs. वो PSBT भी अभी बंद हो गया है. So even those 3-4 lakh जो मिलती थी, that also is not there. So then it's like, how do you make your work? So then this international thing came. Doc Edge Kolkata has been going on for 20 years. That has its own complications of, are European broadcasters going to tell you how to make your film? So then how do you navigate that space as an artist? कि आपको अपना काम भी करना है, अपनी तरह से भी करना है, but पैसे भी उठाने हैं. So that thing was like, so that's been sort of last 10 years, that's been our journeys. Like we started with Flickering Lights, is the first film that we pitched in the international market. And then what we realized, that the minute we wanted to, deviate from the norm of character-driven, human drama-heavy film, funding became very complicated. So the minute we said, okay, this is about a Naga community, the community is important. We can't just isolate one character and make it a hero story, which was the norm. So then how do you be true to your subject, true to your artistic practice, and still get money, which we didn't. So we raised about 50% of the budget. So that navigation has to be, it's something we are all dealing with. But just because I can see that there are a lot of younger filmmakers here, but one thing is that while it's very attractive to see that a Writing with Fire or a Shaunak's film, All That Breathes, is Oscar nominated, Sarvnik's film has done so well, Nocturnes has done well, While We Watch, there are so many films in the recent past that have got a lot of acclaim and that are relatively higher budget films. But I think that in your own artistic practice, it's better that you make some work that you can believe in, rather than say ki funding nahi mila, and then wait for 7-8 years on something that you could have made in 2 years. Like, not to compromise on anything, but not to think that you have to raise 4 crores to make a documentary, because now that has become sort of this thing that okay, अब वो बना रहा है तो इसी से आपका ऑस्कर नॉमिनेशन नहीं होगा आपका. So that journey is something else, and I think you have to walk that path. Everybody wants to jump now, so I think that's one thing that I just wanted to share, because there are filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers here. But definitely, I think it's all of these things are happening together. I mean, this thing of wanting to bracket us in a particular way as South Asian filmmakers, and many of us trying to break away from that, and how to find partners who will enable that.
Yeah, you have opened up so many things in this answer, like this South Asian, this identity of South Asian filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, and then also like a woman filmmaker is another identity, and then finding money and this whole like attention of Indian documentaries outside and how it's affecting. So we will come back to all these questions, especially another very important topic, like you said, is ethics, and like what do you consider as ethics when you're making a documentary? But we'll come back to it. First, we'll go to Kuldeep. We were actually like, I really wanted to show his film, and this section was a documentary section, and then we had a discussion because Kuldeep wanted to and Amit wanted to say it as it's an essay film. It's not a documentary film, and I was kind of in a way alluring him by saying that like this documentary arena is now broader, and let's show it, and then you can discuss that. It's so in a way. I wanted to ask you, like, I'll come to this part later, but how was your process of Phool Ka Chhan? And Amit is like your friend for many years, and how this whole kind of film was made. What is the journey of this film?
I think what we did was it's a continuation of a longer journey. Actually, it is not just for the purpose of the film, but somewhat similar to what Anupama was saying. If you're familiar with the context, It is not just a project for you. So in that sense, it's a part of a journey which has been there for 20 odd years of listening, of reading about Kumarji. His music is a part of almost daily. It's a part of my life. It's been a big part of Amit's life. So, I mean, it came naturally to us. It didn't seem like any work or any, reading. All there is about, written about Kumarji. Kumarji wrote himself. He's talked a lot about music, so there are a lot of lecture demonstrations, there are a lot of interviews. So, so there was a lot of material to start with. I think maybe he's one of the most documented Indian classical musicians of the 20th century in terms of books written on him, articles written. Once we had a lot of material, we initially it was clear to us that we did not want to really talk about his life per se, because there's enough material on that. There's documentaries done on that. There are books on that. So why not look at his thought process through the idea of the bandish, through the idea of his through his compositions, through his thoughts, and so on. And when Alan came on board as an illustrator animator, then it gave us all the more freedom to deal with these abstract concepts in music, and so it was. So we sort of gleaned through all this material that we had gathered. So maybe a research of 2-3 months of just discussing, bouncing off ideas, and sort of shortlisted a few scenes that we felt were crucial as windows or as pathways to sort of peep into his imagination, his interiority, his creativity. And then we worked scene by scene, short breakdown, and so on with Alan. And then when you go through this process, you realize that there is a certain notion that you start with, and that takes a life of its own. And then this is what you have on the table. And then you work with that. So it's somewhat of how, so it's something emerges out of that process, something between the lines. And that starts talking to you. And that's not just positive things. Those are also that comes with its own limitations that, we have only this much for this. What can we do with this? So it's a hands-on kind of thing of working with the animation material that we have, the script that we have, the music that we have.
Trying to just interrupting you, how did you come up with this decision that you're making an animation documentary and not like a regular shooting live action documentary?
Firstly, the straight direct access that it gives us to deal with abstraction. And when we talk about music, essentially we start with that and we end with that. There are a lot of things that you talk along, but finally it's something so elusive, something that cannot be captured in that sense. And animation, I think, is a brilliant medium to deal with that. So very initially in the project, I think it was clear that we will use this. So yeah, I mean, just wanted to say that so something emerges out of that, and then you work with that material. And I would say the screenplay of the film was, yes, written initially during the research as well, but it went on getting modified, and I would say the screenplay finally got written on the edit table. So restructuring iterations, the whole thing there were multiple iterations and restructuring of the film, finally down to the edit and post-production sound, so different layers coming onto the thing. So it was not a very top-down, waterfall kind of a process at all. It was a very iterative kind of a process.
And Amit is not here. He doesn't travel with his films mostly. So if you can talk about Amit's way of kind of working and how was your experience with him? He's a fantastic artist. We have seen his earlier work, and I think this film is, it's a very fine work from him. I think one of the best works of his is this film. So how was it working with him, and what is it that that you really feel that how he lives in Himachal, he kind of makes his films almost by himself. He doesn't need, like, most of the times also foreign funding, and he just keeps his voice, unadulterated. So if you can talk about Amit and his process.
It might seem that he is somebody who was very clear on what he wants all the time, which most of the time he is. I mean, he has a vision of what he wants, but he, in this film at least, I can very confidently say that he was very open to inputs from me and Alan, and worked with that openness with us. So when we would describe a certain musical concept like Lay with Alan, we would leave Alan to his means, in sense of what he would come up with. And then he would come up with a storyboard, and then we would maybe give a few suggestions and nudge it here and there. But largely, it was about making it more open-ended as possible, as interpretative as possible. So even if there was a larger vision to what we were, in the sense of a larger design to it, the intricacies and the subtleties was something which is a part of which is the process itself of the actual making of it. And in that, he came with his own thoughts and all, but was again very open to inputs, and so. Yeah.
Okay. Now we have come to like Nocturnes. So if you can talk about this, like, how did you really think of the form? And yesterday you mentioned that you met Manasi, and then that kind of started the process. But then how did you really come up to the form? Because most of the times what I have seen young filmmakers, they just keep shooting a lot of things, and then it becomes very difficult to really bring things together and then create a story later. And you really have to think a lot before you start shooting. So what was, if you can tell us about the process of how you kind of like got to the form and how you really executed the whole thing?
So I want to just dial back to the previous film, because in Flickering Lights was a film which was more verite. So that was that kind of film in which we shot a lot, but with a lot of thought. But still, it was a lot. We shot 360 hours for Flickering Lights, and over like 3 years, off and on in the village, because it was about this process of waiting for electricity, and even we didn't know when and if it'll come. So every time we would go thinking it's going to come, and we went 13 times like that to the village in Manipur, and then it wouldn't come, and then we would be disappointed, people would be disappointed. So it was that. So that was the journey of that film. So there are kinds and kinds of documentaries. So but with Nocturnes, what happened was that once we went there, and the first schedule we actually did interviews. And so now when I look at this film, you're like, what were we thinking? But when you start and it's a documentary and you want to understand what's happening, so we interviewed Mansi, we interviewed Vicky, we interviewed Ramana, everybody, just normal interviews, just to understand things. And the first trailer we had actually has interviews also. But then when we sort of started thinking about what really we wanted to do and what we were responding to, we were like, no, we don't want this at all. We don't want information to be given in this form. And we were like, yes, we are making a film on a scientist's work. We want to be respectful to that. It's important. But how do we then, what are we bringing to the table as filmmakers? So that's always a very, very important and crucial question we keep asking each other, Anirban and I, is that it's not only about recording what somebody else is doing, because unka to life chali raha hai, to aap kya kar rahe ho? What is your intervention? So that's very important. So in our case, it was this, we were like, okay, how are we going to talk about our connection for nature, but with this as the ground for it, and yet be respectful to what they're doing. And so as we went along, even in that, with the same material that we had shot, which included interviews, then I edited something else, which was a 9-minute piece, which was more atmospheric, which had more a sense of the forest, which had the magic of the moths, but not so much about why she was studying the moths. And so the humans were just sort of there, and everything was sort of just being explored in a more open and cinematic way. So then the impetus was not ki kahani kya hai, science kya hai, but it was something else. What was guiding us was that was more the atmosphere of the forest, because that was the connection with nature that we were seeking. So it's like, okay, the fog coming, or the green, the different shades of green. So we're like, okay, let's look more deeply and not make picture postcards. So so it's been so interesting that this film has been shot by your classmate Satya, an amazing camera person. So one would imagine that like in a beautiful location shot by this brilliant camera person, it would be very easy to take production, stills of the film. But then actually we have a really tough time grabbing stills to put in a festival catalog, because the film is so much about being in time that as a still, actually it's not a beautiful still. It's only because of time, and it's only because of what happens within that time that makes the shot beautiful. It's about that particular change in light, or the fog, or the cloud moving in a particular way. So the movement, or even if it's static, it's just that it's only in time that it works. So that was a very interesting thing that we discovered. So in any case, then we realized that this film is more about atmosphere and less about story. So and then and again the thing is that while we film is something in which artistry and business and everything, they all sort of come together and flow in and out of each other, and it becomes important. And in this case, when we submitted this 9-minute thing to Sundance and we got the fund for that, that was a huge validation. And that was important, because this film could not have been made ki hum apne paise se jaake nahi bana sakte hain, because it was like really like solid equipment, lenses, camera person, crew, all of that we needed to get this kind of result, which we had this ambition for in terms of the visual and sound of the film. So then that was like, okay, maybe we're onto something, because we needed that some push at that point. Because when you are trying to make a film that is not following any norms, and nobody's funding you, or nobody's taking you seriously, and which happened a lot with Nocturnes. We're like, is this like a science film? Is it nature film? Is it human story? And they're like, oh, but you should just follow Vicky, because he's like the guy from the indigenous tribe, and you see how his life is changing. And you're like, but yeah, that's interesting, but that's not the only thing. So it's like, how do you understand what your key interest is, and then try to find a cinematic way of translating that. So then from then on, it was just more and more trusting and refining the process of this thing of being very, very minimal. Is like, isko bhi nikal do, usko, matlab, we had shots of them eating, which was very nice. They were like making Maggie and eating or whatever. But then we were like, but why is that interesting? It's like, theek hai, khana to khate hi honge. So all the mundane things we removed. It was like, how do we retain the magic of things? And then we had this thing, okay, the main thing of this film is that mod screen. And that became this thing that we loved that repetition of it. And so in a way, we were actually very inspired by Indian classical music, in Hindustani classical music, in the structuring of the film, because we had this thing, and this was not even like we planned it, but we both absolutely love music. And but it was all sort of, we were talking about music to our editor, and but now in seeing the way the film has turned out, it's like so obvious. It's like, of course, it's like the mod screen is like the sir that you keep coming to, and every time you approach it in a different way. I'm like, yehi to hai structured. But it's not like we thought about it that way. But definitely that was the inspiration. Subliminally, that was what led us to trust that thing, that every time we're going to arrive at the mod screen, but in a different way, and get something else out of it. So that was the thing which allowed us to think that, okay, we're going to keep the dialogues to the minimum, and thoda karke we'll give the information. So my plan was that we're going to push the audience to that extent ki you're just like, acha kuch to bata do bhai, so that when then the science or the information comes, then they're like, oh, okay, so this is what mods do. And I can guarantee you that everybody who saw the film, maybe some of them are here, if I ask them any piece of information that came in the film, they will be able to answer because there was so less of it, and that they were dying to get it by the time it came. So in fact, today I met your classmate Priyanka, and she was saying, "Oh yeah, I didn't know there were 115,000 species of moths," and so she actually remembered it from the film. So that's why I'm saying that when you rarify it so much that people are dying for information, rather than make it into a science lesson in which you're like, "Oh my God, how much of science do I have to get through?" So that was all those kind of tricks that you do to keep an audience in a film that is actually a 2-line story, and the whole thing is an expansion in time of an 83-minute feature.
Thank you. Welcome, Sarvnik, and film Against the Tide. We screened it yesterday, and if we were just discussing about like documentaries and why do we make documentaries, what is it that really inspires us, and how the form of documentaries, how it's changing for last 15-20 years, and now this whole docu and fiction, it's getting blurred. So maybe you can start by telling us how is your journey as a filmmaker, and then later we can talk about Against the Tide.
Sure. My apologies first. There is a Ram Mandir happening every step of the way. Pura Bombay khuda hua hai. It took me quite a while to get here, so my big apologies. I think for me, the form of Against the Tide was very much inspired by how the process kind of turned out for me, personally speaking. In retrospect, everything kind of makes sense, but at that point of time, it felt like I was stumbling along the way, and it almost felt like I was being guided by the nose, like I had to be. That is how daft I feel when I look back at those major turning points in my own process. And so the form of it really came from the process, the fact that I did not find my story for a very long time. Things that I took really personally to heart, which was, are you a storyteller? Are you an activist? What are you trying to do? What is your motivation? Going back to it over and over again, not just for yourself, but also in the articulation of it to other people. It was I clearly remember there was a moment when it happened when I felt like I had unencumbered myself from all the baggages that I was carrying. I realized maybe I do not know enough. Maybe I just need to keep turning up every day, and eventually I will know. So I suppose it was this kind of a faith that came from the ease that comes with, I don't know, but I'll figure it out. And so that made turning up every day possible. The way things happened for me in this film was that for a long time, this film was a very, very political film in its very intention and the way I was thinking of it. I wanted to make a film about displacement of people. I wanted to make a film about this coastal road, but also what Bombay as a city means. Displacement, I thought, was very dear to me because of my own family's history. So I was following that thread. Only the vocabulary, I was so caught in it. Only once I had kind of left that behind, that it was going to be a film about displacement, did it start to reveal itself to me. In that duration, I had, in the 3 years before I kind of knew what I was doing, I'd already met Ganesh and Rakesh. I'd already sensed and experienced this strife that is within the community, because I'd gone to scientists and fishermen meetings where, CMFRI people would talk about ethical or sustainable ways of fishing with fishermen. And to me, it sounded almost like preaching to the choir, because, there were these people who lived on this coast for millennia, and they fished in the way they fished, and to be asked by scientists about sustainable ways. And I started to feel that the conservation narrative is so narrow. Like we talk about saving the whales and the dolphins and the turtles, but it's as if by saving the whales and the dolphins and the turtles, you're saving the ecosystem. The ecosystem is also the tiny krill, which is maximum in number, which is being farmed today for feeding the fish farms, the artificial fish farms. So was it then about, saving the community? So for me, those unlearnings that happened, the wrong lessons that you pick up along the way, that was, I suppose, very essential and elemental. And what ended up happening was I was kind of pitching a film which was about this divergence in tradition and modernity that has happened, in which I had not yet thought of Ganesh Rakesh as my characters, but somebody mistook them as brothers in one of my mentoring sessions. And the things suddenly changed for me because suddenly it was a biblical story about value systems, and that transformation was instantaneous. Like for 3.5 years, I had no clue, and in that moment, I just suddenly knew. And a lot that had happened with me over the course of just turning up every day, like I had now started to notice that Ganesh and Rakesh are sitting and drinking together, and they are talking about this, which was knocking at the back of my mind. And so for a year, I just stopped kind of filming. I had stopped taking the pressure of making a film in any way or form, and I started drinking whiskey with them because they used to drink a lot of whiskey. And we had a camera on the tripod, and in their conversations was something that I found was their love for the sea, their love for their identity. Their identity was bigger than just the livelihood, and this divergence, which was also convergence. This ambition for an entire community, and almost like a poetic fearlessness of a future, of an indeterminate future. What's the point of being anxious about it without articulating it as such? You see, and I started to feel like I found two archetypes. Like, how is this possible that the gods of documentary have brought me here? It really wasn't my doing that, I was just brought there. And that's the major shift in my thinking that happened. That people don't think of themselves in archetypes. That human life, which looks very banal on the surface, each life is actually very, very political in its existence. And I realized instead of trying to finding the narrative, all I have to do is peel the layers and it'll reveal itself. And so I suppose that's what really happened. The 3 years of relationship building, a year of drinking without any purpose, and the purposelessness of it ended up becoming really the core kernel of truth, because we had stumbled, they had seen me stumble for so long that it always felt like, hallelujah, we've arrived at it together. They'd started worrying for me. So I feel like I'm glad today that the film resonates the way it has, and that the journey of it has ultimately ended up making sense, because at that moment when I was filming, Rakesh's baby was born, and so like God has saved me a lot. Rakesh's baby was born, but I didn't know that was going to be my film's opening. I'd gone and filmed the baby naming ceremony, and I'd filmed it terribly because I'm just a bad cinematographer. I'm not good at it. And so I went and filmed it badly. Only 2-3 months later, I realized that both Ganesh and Rakesh are pregnant at the same time. And I thought, well, I've got an opportunity to film the baby naming ceremony again, and also the second friend's now going to have a baby. So here is my opening and closing of the film. And in between, by then I kind of knew that Ganesh's strife was, should he do LED, should he not do LED? It looked like it was a matter of time. I was never pegging the ending of my film on whether he would or he won't. That was besides the point. The point was people like Ganesh are often left with no option at all, no choice at all. And that's where I suppose I found out that the story of our times is hidden in. What does it take for a person to finally take the plunge? What does it take? And because of the kind of intimacy we had and the group effort that it had turned into, with Rakesh, there was very little sense of hiding anything. There's no lock to the door. They never shut the house door, and you walk in the morning at 4 o'clock, put your camera, and you've got the sense of everydayness unfold in front of your eyes. With Ganesh, you had to ring a doorbell, and it's a matter of then not just having them their consent, but enthusiasm, and that's where the difference was. If Ganesh wasn't going to tell me that his wife's gold he's going to sell because it's come to that place, I would never have known. And so, therefore, I suppose this kind of a form came from the relationship that I was in, the kind of investment of time and love that had been put in by everyone, almost like suspending disbelief, like, to imagining that someday this will all make sense and keeping that kind of faith going, because that wasn't the point at all. The end goal wasn't the point at all. Maza bahut aa raha tha karte hue. So I think the form came from there. I wanted this wonder that universe throws your way when you set out. You may not know what you want to achieve, but if you just turn up often enough, something magical starts to happen. The rain is taken from your hands and given to the universe, and it takes care of things. You just have to be patient and I suppose familiar with what you're doing and sure of what you're doing.
When you say patience, it's almost like 4 years. It's much more than just the word patience, because it's really.
Of course, that's why I think I was so existential at the time that I could see it through, and which is what I mean by it all makes sense in retrospect. It was the milestones that I today see as milestones at that time were heartbreaking moments that just required to dust up and get up again and turn up.
Thanks. So we'll kind of take some questions, then again I'll ask some questions, because otherwise it will be too much. We will keep talking, and some of you might not have seen all 3 films, but you may have some questions.
Hello, my name is Rahul. I want to ask a question to Sarvnik ma'am. You have been through the official Oscar qualifying film festivals. What do you think where we are lacking in our campaign that we don't win an Oscar but we get nominated for it? And what other countries are doing better than us so that they are winning but we are not?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that. See, the thing is, Oscars, their award space, and we are considered international or regional cinema, subtitled films. If we put ourselves through that ringer, rung is what we will get. So we do get rung about it in the process of it. It wasn't just I alone. Anupama very much was a part of, and she'll share her experience with it. I think the point of taking the film for getting it qualified was my own personal ambition. It felt like when world had kind of brought you to this point, let's see what it looks like all the way to the end. And in that you go with a lot of hope. And looking back at it now, I wish my idea of success was not tied into whether I will qualify, make it to the shortlist or not, or I will make it. Because what I ended up doing was, after a year of having an amazing, very enriching, life-changing experience traveling with the film, what I ended up is I pegged my own happiness to that one moment. And I think that's where, as artists, as filmmakers, we need to take our value back into our own hands. Our value can't be attached to how much our film has been sold, how many countries it's been sold in, which festival it premiered at, what awards it won. We know our very own journeys, and you see that how dangerous this is, because this then keeps very many people away from actually coming in and making their films, because then this becomes a very daunting uphill task. So I don't think for me taking it to the Oscars was ever the agenda. That it did become along the way is because, I suppose, human failing, when you're in competition, then you go with the intention of winning, and if you don't win, then of course your heart hurts. And that's where you feel like, was there any film that I saw which felt like, oh, the filmmaker didn't deserve to be there? No, I'm yet to watch a film where I thought in the last 2 years that I thought wasn't deserving of. So when all of us are deserving, then to be pitted against one another felt like I wish there was another way of doing it. I'm glad that I did, and it's simply because it was a tick mark in my own personal ambition. Today, I feel no grouse about it, but at that moment, I did play a lot with my own mental wealth, because it made me feel like I hadn't done enough, and that inadequacy is an unnecessary feeling to live with when life is enough to show you that you're inadequate, and So I just hope that I would look at it differently myself when I make my next film and go out there and not think of myself and my own work's value by what it did at the festivals and competitions. I think you should surely take Anupama's.
Hi everyone, glad to be here. So my question is for all of you. If you could share that one documentary, which was personally path-breaking for you. So it could be yours, it could be someone else's. What's that one documentary when you watched it, it changed or significantly shifted the way you look at documentaries? It could be in terms of storytelling, form.
Many actually, So for me, it was Buena Vista Social Club. When I saw that film, I just felt I never knew that like a documentary can be something like this. It can have. Otherwise, I was always thinking that documentaries are always about problems, and that film kind of completely changed my perspective of how a story can be told. How he's also intervening in the thing, but yet discovering something and really finding something. So it really changed my way of looking at documentaries.
I don't know. I love many documentaries, but I don't want to name them in a way because if you ask me what is my favorite film, I would rather answer that because for me again, I don't want to differentiate. I didn't become a documentary filmmaker because I saw a documentary and fell in love with it. It's a bit different. I fell in love with cinema because I love cinema. I love films. And I chose documentary because I wanted that creative freedom and I wanted to use cinema to explore the world on my own terms. So it was not because I fell in love with the documentary. Though I love Nanook of the North, and then I realized that the whole thing was staged. But anyway, yeah, I don't know whether you've seen it. But it's nevertheless a lovely film, even though it's so controversial right now. But so I don't want to name, so that's not my favorite film. But I'm just saying that that's something that charmed me at that time when I had just joined FTI. And but the film that I love is actually Tokyo Story by Ozu, and it's that kind of minimalism and that thing of what do you leave out, what do you show? Like some of the most important things are not even there in the film in Ozu's films. And then and in the end, like three guys are sitting and talking about how life is disappointing or something. So it's like I mean, for me, that is the most poignant and beautiful thing about cinema. It's like, how can you become so simple and yet reach the height of profundity? So for me, definitely Tokyo Story. I'm also a great fan of Abbas Kiarostami. Yeah, so those would be sort of my cinematic influences. And for all fiction, documentary, life, everything.
So many, it's so hard. I don't know, Searching for Sugar Man, Belovi. There's a French film, this person's mother is dying. What's the name of the film? It's about life. I like stories that are telling one thing on the surface and telling something completely other about the world, the times that we're living in, just below it. I like Bridges of Time by Audrey Stonies. It's a film about documentary filmmakers, his own heroes in Latvia. And I don't think I've seen a more poignant film on the art of filmmaking and kind of making sense of time through cinema. Many films, and my recall is terrible. I'm struggling with names right now.
Again, there's just so many, but whatever comes to mind right now is Glass, if you've seen the film. Zoo, of course, the same filmmaker. Man with a Movie Camera.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
That's so some of these names in my college days, that sort of.
I'll just take the questions, but just take a few very quick kind of questions. That in Kumarji's film, like in Phool Ka Chand, you have avoided the Malwa music and also the Nirguni bhajans, and you have stuck to the things that he composed. So was it, obviously it's a conscious decision, but what was the thought behind it?
The thought was not to not include these, but what serves the content, the narrative, the ideas, the larger idea of Madhyalaya that we were dealing with, which Kumarji in many ways articulated and sort of underlined. what he used to call as the Swabhavik lay. जीने की जो the lay in which we do things, kind of thing. So this selection was in that sense swabhavik for us. Although one Malwa Ki Lokdhun does come at the start, the first composition actually, but not a very conscious decision not to include those.
And you are a musician yourself, and you're kind of like making or in the process of making a film about another like great musician. So in a way, like what it did to like this whole journey as an artist and as a musician, what it changed in you? Is there something that you really, in this process felt that okay, you have found something, or your musical journey has kind of.
I think I'm still not able to articulate that exactly. I'm still grappling with it. Something is emerging. I think rather than me verbalizing it, I think it's there in the work somewhere, rather than putting words to it. But there's something which is there, which I see a lot of potential in visual and music. So I hope something emerges out of it.
Okay. Sarvnik, I have a question for you. Is in the film where the richer guy, who is the trawler, yeah. So like the sequences in his house, they almost feel fictional, or like when you're saying it's quite interesting when you say that you're finding the story while making it. But actually, when I saw the film, I was in that selection for MIF, and I thought like, wow, it's quite a scripted. It almost looks so scripted because it's these two parallel lives. Obviously, as you say, that the world conspires and it kind of gives you so many things. So, like, were you like, because you were so friendly with them and you had the access, but the sequences in the house, and whatever they're talking, you almost feel that, oh, like, is it a fiction, or is it something which has happened and then we have recreated it, or how, like, what, if you can talk about it?
Ganesh's mother didn't want me in the house at all. She saw me as an encumbrance in the house. She saw me as a person who had no business to be there, and therefore our time in Ganesh's house was very limited and sacrosanct, which essentially meant then I had to extract the husband and wife away from the mother's gaze so that they could be comfortable. And what ended up happening was Manali, Ganesh's wife, who was feeling rather unheard at that time, started using my camera on Ganesh against him. So she was not being able to catch hold of him for long enough for him to hear how unhappy she was. And what ended up happening was every time I would extract the couple out of the house, and that's why you see them at the beach and you see them, every time I've kind of brought them out of the house, she's boiling over. She can't hold it in anymore. And so all I had to do was step away from the way, like, let it happen. And it was interesting because during edit, I would send her assemblies and I would say, dude, this is what the scene is looking like. It is beautiful. Tell me, what do I do about it? Because, like, it's temptation too tempting to not to fall into. And she told me one thing. She said, you know what? I have never felt like any one of these people are listening to me ever. And so I want you to say my story. I want you to not shy away from it. And which is why when the film was done and I went with the final edit of the film to Ganesh Rakesh before we sent it for festival selections, Ganesh had gone really quiet. And I was really so worried because I didn't know after 9 months of edit, I brought the film back now, what is he going to say? Although in my heart, I knew that every moment of it was what we all were kind of wanting for it to happen. And it's taken a lot. It was a lonely process in Macedonia, but not to become a martyr about it. It's just that I felt like I'd breathed life into the film in that time. Like I was feeling exhausted and tired. And Ganesh saw it and he went quiet. And the next day he sent me a message saying that I had to rush back home to apologize to Manali. I just did not realize what an asshole I was being to my wife. She loves me and I can see her eyes for the first time. I'm seeing what she... So I think it was a very, like I said, my relationships ended up, really deciding the form. And it was generally the challenges I was dealing with on location, which I was kind of trying to find solutions for, which ended up working in the long run.
It's so interesting that like the as soon as the camera comes in a space, it does so much so many people's lives, and some real thing comes up. It's quite a.
That's also another thing, Umesh. Also, like, unlike a fiction film, we are filming for 10 hours. You're waiting for your protagonist to. I mean, when the camera comes on, then you are acting the person you are, and you want that to go away. And so when it's again because of the repetition that of being there every day, that boredom that starts to seep and you cannot enact beyond a certain point. So just there was another thing which for me was to gather a lot of footage, so that we could actually, for me, making a continuum of time was very important. So that is something that I was seeking कि हो सकता है edit में हम लोग को एक दिन बनाने के लिए film day one time we may need 10 days of shooting thing, with which how we were filming, that we take very very long takes, we would not cut the camera, we'll not shift it too much, and just knowing that चीजें रिपीट होती हैं, आज नहीं होगा कल हो जाएगा, कल नहीं होगा परसों होगा, और जब होगा तब बहुत अच्छे से होगा, क्योंकि सब यहाँ पे अब familiar environment है और एक rhythm हम लोग achieve कर चुके थे. तो I think that's where it came from.
Like, one question to all of us, and in a way, we were talking about the ethics of like a documentary filmmaker. And nowadays, when this form itself is evolving, and there can also be a fiction. I saw a film we had selected in MIF, which almost looked like a fiction, but the people were real, because the kind of shot taking, everything was fictional. And I really like this way the form is actually, like, it's not stuck in some kind of concept that this is how a documentary should be made. But even then, like, do you think that, like, what are the ethics with which a documentary filmmaker, or maybe like there are young filmmakers who are going to make documentaries or making documentaries, what is it to all of you that what is important?
It's something that's very important to me, for sure. And I also, when I see a film, I do like, there are two things that I respond to. One is the pacing, which is more the editing, or more than the sound or the image. So I get into a film when it's paced in a particular way, and I can enter it because of the time, the way the time is treated. And the second is if I feel like I can trust the director, and that comes from something, like it comes. It just is a combination of many things, and many times you, even if it's staged, that's okay. Like, I'm not saying that you should not stage something, but there has to be something which is authentic and honest. And that is, for me, true in fiction also. In fiction also, I can find that in authenticity, when I feel like, it looks like great acting, but I feel like, no, the actor is not totally present, because I can feel that in the eyes, even if they're looking down, I can feel the consciousness of being on camera. So it's exactly the same thing in docs, that authenticity and that trust. I think I have to trust. So then after that, everything is okay. Whatever you've done is all right. Whether it's animation, fiction, documentary, jo bhi aapne kiya hai, wo sab jaiz hai. But I think in terms of what the expectations that you set up with the people who are appearing in your film, that's where for me the ethics part of it becomes very, very important. And because when you go into a space, and especially when you're on a budget and you've hired a crew and whatever, and then you're feeling like, oh, you have to get something. And sometimes life doesn't give you, and sometimes it does. And so it's like, then is it okay to make things happen? So, I mean, those are the kind of questions that we as filmmakers have to deal with. And sometimes for us, for example, when we were filming with Nocturnes, there was one thing in which, and every day of filming was really expensive, and then we went to this highest point of the that Eagleness Sanctuary where we were filming, and we set up, and like not even one freaking hawk moth came that day. It was like all blank, and like there were 2 moths flying. So we're like, "Achha, kya kare? Band kar dein kya shoot? Should we just go back, rest at least?" And then we were like, no. Actually, then you understand the film better, because then you feel like, okay, that disappointment is actually really important. And then the point of the film became that even scientists cannot predict whether the moths will come or not come. So when we are set out to make a film in which we want to question an anthropocentric gaze, this was at the heart of it, because you're saying, okay, humans don't control everything. Humans can't. Even a scientist who's been working there for a long time doesn't know whether the moth's going to come. So then their disappointment, then the moth's not coming, the way the screen looks, then that became a story of its own. So instead of trying to change it or trying to this thing, you embrace it. So I think that is very important rather than trying to be too clever, I think, and trying to fix it and trying to make a drama out of it, So I think that for me that's important. And finally, like Sarvnik was saying, that there are kinds of films, but especially in a film like hers, in which there's like the people are the heart of the film. It is a very, very human-centric film. So in that, the consent, whether they are okay with being the way they are represented, that's very crucial. In our film, it was not so much about the representation, but it's about the science. Of course, the representation too. But, it had to be like, if Mansi can see the film and say, okay, this is correctly representing the struggle I've been through for the last 8-10 years, whatever. So we filmed with her for a shorter time. But, like the whole, it has to be true to their feeling, because that is very important, I think. So it's different in different films. But I personally feel that the onus is totally on you, whatever consent form you may get signed. But finally, people still don't understand that the way it's going to be seen and the political ramifications, how it can be perceived by your own community when it is shown, then all of that. So I think those kind of things you have to be so seeped in to that thing that sorry, maybe it's sounding a bit sort of patronizing, but you have to take that call for people sometimes, even if they are okay with things. And this happened a lot with Nirnay, for example, because that was a very personal story. So it's like, so the girls were telling things to Pushpa as a friend, but we are showing the film to the world. So we have to be very careful in what we are sharing. So I had to make that call. I was like, no, we are not. So if somebody is talking about the in-laws asking her to, have an abortion because they thought she was going to have a male child, I was like, they have trusted you. Even if the in-laws are evil, I'm not going to get people into jail because of your film. So I was like, okay, let's use the voice about that whole thing. Let's bring the trauma of the girl, but let's not get people into jail, because no documentary, no film is worth it. And you cannot do it. I mean, I think that is, and I know many filmmakers are trying to make something which is sensational or which is something which never seen before. But these are lives of real people at stake, real relationships, and nothing in the world is worth risking that. So I think there is no way on earth you cannot think about ethics, especially in documentaries.
Also, because I think it's just, it would be short-sighted to think that people won't be able to. Honesty and truth is abstract; it cannot be defined. So therefore, there is no one monolithic text that one can say this is the right practices of doing a documentary. Every form will come up with its own set of ethical questions. Most importantly, I'd say it's short-sighted because it can be seen. Dishonesty can be, disingenuity can be seen. Camera doesn't lie. You can see coercion when it's happening. Within that, how do you find that elemental truth is what your job is, your eye is for? And that's why we take 4, 5, 6 years, because it's hard to get to that truth. And it's hard to arrive there, both in terms of stitching a film, a story, a narrative, and answering all the questions, many, many questions that arise. Just like Anupama was saying that they didn't find the moths, we went and we didn't find the fish. And we really wanted the fish. And of course, as cleverness takes on, because you're in the process, you're in the process of self-preservation. You're like, oh shit, I spent so much money, now there is no fish, but that was going to be the ending of my film. And so you're constantly like, oh, then I had to let go of control, say, I cannot craft it beyond this point. I tried. We dangled LED, he took a loan, like how much more could we do? The fish isn't there. And it took me 6 months to realize that was my documentary find. There is no fish. And that is what was standing right in front of my eyes, that no amount of modern intervention, technological intervention can be the answer at this point of time. Science may be promising you certainty, but that is where it fails, because there is so much else which it cannot control. And that is where I thought climate change was at the heart of my film's narrative. That's where climate change ended up showing itself, because how do you show fish migration patterns? It's impossible. How do you show rising temperature of the water? How do you show rising sea levels? These are things that you can't show without a making a different kind of a film. So that's where the climate change was really showing itself, revealing itself. I had heard Bhayo Nako sang, chanted along at every naming ceremony. It took me many years to realize that's where Rakesh's confidence comes from, that he doesn't fear that he'll be able to take care of his family, he'll be able to feed them. And we, modern humans, we don't know how to feed ourselves. We are dependent, and that's where perhaps our fear comes from. So much of it is actually living it through. It's a process of osmosis, I feel like. It's like all of the life may not be happening to you, but you're living it through your skin. Like you're letting the experience of it filter through you. And that's where I think it's immaterial whether ethics, non-ethics, you'll see it. It's just short-sighted. If you go for the shortcut, it'll be short-sighted, because then what's the point of, doing all of this?
I think pretty much everything has been said. But I mean, really, I think something that Sarvnik mentioned, I think this is something that I would like to continue on, is letting go. Is that you start with an idea, and then it starts taking form, and then there's some material on the table which comes along, and you start working with it, and you're working within those limitations. Just like in terms of the Kumarji film, every iteration of the tal, every sum, when you come back to the sum, and then there's this cycle of say 16 beats and the teen tal. Every time it's trying to say something different, is what Kumarji used to say. Now, if I want to try and understand what he's saying, is that being open to what are the new possibilities that are coming along in your process of making. And being open to that also means letting go of the notions that you started with. So I think one of the things that I learned in this process is just letting go and letting it take a form of its own, which is easier said than done, because very difficult.
Yes, any questions?
What exactly do you keep and what not? Because right now I'm sitting on the editing table and it feels like everything's like my child. Like I want to keep this, I want to keep this, I want to keep this. How do you not keep something? Like how do you decide, I want this and I don't want this?
Get a good editor.
The funny part is that my editor was on board when we were shooting. So he's somewhat become like in my other director. He's like, oh, ये भी बहुत प्यारा है, ये हमने वो आंटी को shoot करा था, ये बहुत सुंदर है, इनकी कहानी खूबसूरत है. So in the whole, how do you decide the narrative after you've shot?
No, actually, this is a question that had to be asked before you went to Dharavi, because I think a lot of this comes because, for example, the minute you said Dharavi, all my sort of this thing, I was like, why Dharavi? Because it's like easy to go there and shoot people because, their doors are open and they're, so it's like, why aren't you going to a gated colony and shooting that? I mean, that's always the first question I ask all my students, because everybody says documentary idea, matlab, rickshaw puller, rack picker, beggar, these are because you feel like their lives are available for you to film. So I think, so the intention, what was the intention behind going to Dharavi? So that will guide what to keep or not keep. So if your intention was to show the joyousness of people there, then that will guide you in your edit. If it is to show the misery, and what is the intention of showing the misery, I don't know. You need to decide that. So I think everything comes from the intentionality. And I want to, I don't know how many of you saw their film yesterday, The Rhythm of a Flower. So the thing is, I didn't understand many things in the film, and I was thinking that should I read the Hindi or English, and beech mein fir wo chala jata tha. But what struck me was that this film is coming from a deep quest and an engagement that became very apparent to me, because the where you pitch the film, how deep you're going, and I'm somebody who loves Kumarji's music and all. I even learned singing, though I sing terribly, but I learn it because I love it so much. So I could immediately sense that it's coming from that kind of depth. And I was like, Baki sab, I felt some of it was uneven, some of it was brilliant, but I'm like, it doesn't matter. For me, it was just worth it. It was such a satisfying experience to see the film. So you just sense it, right? So because it was pitched at that depth. So even though I didn't understand, so you have to know where you want to pitch things apart from the intention of why you're making the film. So it's not the thing कि आपने shoot कर लिया, आप edit में बैठ के सोच रहे हैं कि अब क्या कहानी बनाए. It's too late. I think you should have thought before
No.
Even you set out from here to Bombay or wherever from your house to see ki
because we
क्यों
have,
करना है?
we have
I mean,
we can discuss it.
it's okay. This is just a thought to leave. About your individual case, we can discuss after the session. But I'm just saying that, not to, maybe you had a great intention, but I'm just saying that it is not something, it is not a casual, engagement.
Yeah.
It has to come from somewhere much deeper. Maybe it has, but I'm saying that, and that will give you the answer to what you're asking us. It will come to you. If you approach it from that thing कि आपका intention क्या था?
Hi, my name is Pari. I had a question for Sarvnik, but so my question was, in your film, since it centers on climate change and overfishing and all of those kinds of problems, I feel like there is constantly, whether it's like natural science discussions or just an urban gaze, I would say there is an urge to either teach fishing communities things or to rescue them in that sense. So it takes away a lot of like stewardship away from them, in the sense of you only would care about their problems because unki majboori hai, or they don't have any other choice, etc., etc. And a lot of times that agency is taken away from them. But what I really enjoyed in your documentary was that they were just as vehemently protecting the ocean or its creatures as much as a scientist would, and that's something we don't necessarily get to see. So is that something that you went in when you began the project, or is that something like a sensibility you developed through the process of forming this relationship with Rakesh or Ganesh or any of the other people in the fishing community?
It's how dichotomies of everything kind of coexist simultaneously. So when I was for the first 3 years, when I was trying to figure out for myself what it is that I wanted to do, when I was in the process of research, I had also started seeing my own response to the language of protest. I started thinking of it as rhetoric, and it's on repeat mode, and my own kind of emotional reaction became my own checking point to say that अगर इसी रास्ते में जाते रहे तो मेरा खुद का दिमाग बंद हो जाता है to hear the repetitions and whatever. A process of stopping to say they them had happened for me, because what happened was that I heard Ganesh one day say that Kolis are the last bastions of Bombay. Koli gaye to Bombay gaye. And I started feeling like it's so true. We'll cut off all the mangroves, we'll make high rises everywhere, and I will be one of those people who will be living in a sea view apartment. And so it's not a film which is being made for them. It's a film which is being made for me and my value system and how I feel. I needed to anchor it back to myself and how I was feeling. And I felt like between Ganesh and Rakesh, that was a conversation that I was always having with my own heart and mind. Bombay was making me feel like a loser, like I've not achieved enough, I've not done enough. And then there was the part of me which was raised by my family, conditioned by my family, which was to learn to be grateful, learn to be happy, learn to be satisfied, and constantly feeling at odds with that if I was satisfied, how will I get more? Then how will I be successful? And so, of course, there was between Ganesh and Rakesh, the larger political debate was happening. That's where the idea for the film being a series of conversations came from also. But I think what you're talking about, the resilience, actually came from the fact that I wanted this conversation which was happening between my own heart and mind to continue to happen. That's what I learned from it, that I needed to engage with the other part of me which I am being forced not to engage with, because if I didn't, then this looks very meek and it's not enjoyable at all. And so I suppose the story wasn't being made for anyone else. I was kind of learning my own lessons as I was going along the ways, in which there was the need to be witnessed, the human need to be witnessed, and the joy of finding that a life could be so political, even in its everyday exertion. That this bravado that we call as bravado is in every person every day when you wake up and take on life. Life is difficult whether you live in the Koli village or you live. I won't describe my life as particularly simple. So just that whole bravado of repeating itself again and again, and the engagement that I saw between Rakesh and Ganesh, which to me then was not just politics, it was also my own value system which was being discussed, and it was really surreal to see that. I used to have this feeling like I've stepped out of my body and I'm seeing this conversation unfold, which I'd missed for a long time because a part of me was winning over the other part of me. That was my own emotional process, I suppose, while I was filming, which then perhaps reflects in the way you perceive and feel the film.
Hello, all. Good evening. My name is Shreya, and this is the question I want to ask everyone. As young people here who want to make films and without any experience, who don't have a big experience, as Anupama ma'am said before, that we don't have to get stuck at the budget thing and like keep making films. But this is the thing many of us find difficult is, even though you want to make something small, there is always some kind of budget issue or maybe issue with the team, because everyone is not a film student and you want to start from gathering the team also, and you might have to pitch someone. So my question to all of you is, how did you start, how did you do it in earlier in your career? Because I'm sure you all must have faced the same issue of pitching to someone, or basically the funding thing.
More than that, maybe there are some practical questions which maybe all of the young filmmakers would be interested in. So all these titles, we see this fund and that fund, and so how, if you can just talk about this process of like pitching and funding and dockage. Also, maybe some people don't know about dockage, so
so we both have pitched a dockage. Same year actually, Nocturnes and Against the Tide were pitched in 2020 together, along with All That Breathes. So all three films were pitched the same year at Dockage. So Dockage is a pitching forum in Kolkata in which there's a kind of mentoring and project development for 3-4 days, and then at the end of it, people who might be interested in funding or festivals, and who else comes? Festivals, funders, and broadcasters, they come and then you pitch to them, and if anybody's interested, then you have one-on-one meetings with each of these if they are interested in your project. And usually and then they also have some awards like best pitch, best this and best that, and also some other pitching forums like the ITFA forum or the Docs by the Sea Lab, they have awards. So there are some things to be gained by pitching there, because directly I haven't seen anybody like getting a deal at the end of that pitch ever. But there are some awards that you get that open out other avenues. So it's like a slow and painful process, this whole thing of fundraising. And that's why my personal advice would be that if you can make your initial short films without getting into this kind of thing, it's much better. Because unless the film is something that, like, I think Sarvnik, she took 5 to 6 years to make the film. Nocturnes, which in my mind went in like very fast, was 5 years, because Flickering Lights took 7.5 years. So it's like that kind of time investment. It's also possible sometimes, like at least for me and Anirban, because we'd already been working for many years. So we had a little bit of financial stability or money coming from some other commission project or something. But if you're starting out and you have to, fund yourself, like in terms of living, then I don't think going to the international market is ideal, because it's a long haul. And then you'll waste so much money in going to a pitching forum. Even if you get selected, you have to pay for it. They are not going to pay. So if you have to go to CPH and pitch, it's it's Denmark, it's bloody expensive. So it's like, so you have to, so I'm like, you get there when you need to get there. So I think in an initial stage, you get sort of help from friends or whatever, and try to explore yourself as an artist in a simple way first, rather than getting into the funding and pitching, and because that's a whole different game, for which you definitely need some kind of artistic and a maturity, I would say. Also to hold your own, because I've seen so many young filmmakers be totally baffled, because it is possible that you have a wonderful idea, but which a person from Europe is not able to understand because they do not know the intricacies of our caste, ye wo, gender, this thing, region, and so is some like Arya was making this film on a person who was a Naxal, this woman, and then who was sort of given up Naxalism and trying to come into the mainstream, and so she had to start with her pitch saying what is Naxal, because everybody who's a decision maker there doesn't know what that is. So you have to start from very this thing. So I think so for us, what we figured out is, okay, we need money. Okay, now, and there is an audience who doesn't know our context. So you simplify it. Don't dumb it down, simplify it so that they understand. Okay, but you need that maturity. You don't have to make a stupid film to please them, but you have to be able to communicate. But that comes with experience. So I think pehle thoda apna yahan jama lo, and then you try to go for international funding. Because for me, it's been a big, it's a good thing, but it's something that you should get into only when you're ready for it. I mean, it shouldn't be your first step.
It's a very heartbreaking process, and I think even the most seasoned filmmakers before pitching are seen they're quaking and they're shaking, and I think it is difficult. It's a seed of an idea. You're still not sure where it's going, to introduce it to the world. It can be nerve-wracking for the best of us. I think for me, what essentially changed was that I had to change my relationship with fundraising. Instead of a chore, I started thinking of it as I'm forming a relationship with my own film. And in finding the vocabulary to explain to a foreign funder who doesn't know what a Kohli is, who doesn't know what Bombay is, or why this is important, etc., etc., I started refining my own vocabulary. And that I wasn't doing with the conditionality of finding the fund. I was actually doing it because I'd started enjoying the process. So one of the things I think very important is that don't do it if you're thinking that some material success is going to come your way, that you're going to become very famous in a very short span of time, because I'm sure there are better ways of doing it, because this is really painful, heartbreaking, etc., etc. So don't put such conditionalities on yourself, because then as is, it's a hard job to do, and then on top of that, a daunting job, daunting conditions of I will get XYZ fund, and then then we'll never start. So it's good to start. It's okay to let your heart get broken every now and again. Just dust yourself, get up, and don't let it affect you so much. And unnecessary critiques that you were getting along the way. This seems too perfect to be true. What does that mean? Do you go around telling a white filmmaker that this seems too perfect to be true? So it was just like you deal with biases, you come across biases, but that's where it is. We are a colonized country. We've got to keep our head high and keep going, and we will meet people like that along the way. But what to do about it? We don't have funding in our own country. We've got to make best with what is out there, and also keep our head high about it.
I think your idea is brilliant and the best, and everybody should be getting in line to fund it. But obviously that's not true, because every one of us feels that. So it's like, how do you present it so that it makes sense to somebody else? Simplify it, get to the core, and that helps. And every time I work on a proposal, even now, I'm feeling like, oh, I'm getting a better sense of what I'm trying to say. So it's an extremely useful thing. Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to say is that even dockage, instead of dockage, I think for younger filmmakers, Let's Doc is a much better platform. It's low stress, it's all Indian mentors, and it really helps. And you will get that support that I think will be very useful for people who are starting out. So I think that's a very good option. And it doesn't have this thing of you won't raise any funds, or maybe you do get an award or so, but it's more to develop your project. And I think that's a much more valuable thing at that stage.
For Indian young documentary filmmakers, are there any like documentary festivals which they can kind of go, or like spaces where, because there are a lot of documentary filmmakers in Delhi, in Kolkata, in
MIF is there, of course. But,
MIF, yeah.
ISFK is there in Kerala. There's Film South Asia in Kathmandu.
There's People's Film Festival in Kolkata. There are many. There's the Bhubaneswar Film Festival, which is very nice, which they've recently started. Yeah, that's a very lovely one. And there are many actually. Film festivals is not so much the issue now. There are actually many film festivals. There's one that the FFSI in Calcutta runs. So there's tons of them. Guwahati has its own now. There's a new one that started in Manipur. So festivals are a lot, but first to make the film is, I think, no more the struggle which many of us continue to have.
I'm Vatsal. My question is to Kuldeep. You talked about letting the art take you through the process of the film, but in the film there are very intentional decisions of representing Kumarji's music through certain visuals, through certain colors. So how much of it comes from a conscious sense, and how much of it comes from feeling, and how do you take that feeling and put it into form, some kind of visual form that we can also see then? If you can discuss a bit more on that.
So everything that you see in the film is intentional. It's just the structure of it is something that emerges or evolves as you go through the process. So it could be let's say the shepherd taking the sheep up the hill. Now the bandish that is playing behind is Rukhwa Tale Aaja, which is in Bhanuvilas, where Kumarji used to stay. There was a small well which was meant for people who went up the Mata Ki Tekri, which was behind the house, to give the bali actually in the midday, in the hot sun. So it is rooted, that whole shepherd taking the sheep up the hill is rooted in that. Rukhwa Tale Aaja is a bandish that he's actually composed, saying, come sit under the tree, drink some water, and then go up. But the meaning that it starts making in the film in that context is slightly different than how the bandish has evolved, the actual context and the story behind it. So everything that you see in the film is intentional. The meaning making is something which is emergent, which is not necessarily completely top down. And you have to, so that's why I was saying that the screenplay is constantly evolving, and what is being layered, new meanings are being brought to bandishes. So we didn't really want to have a one-to-one correspondence with the idea of how a bandish came about, what was his genesis in Kumarji's life, and we are going to depict it exactly in the same way. No. How are we looking at it with the material that we have now? That is, what was Kumarji's bandish and life and inspiration doing to us is equally important as much as looking at. So when we look at a persona like Kumarji, you're not looking essentially at his life and how he used to live it. Yes, that's important. But what were his inspirations is something that you are trying to look at through some biographical information, through his compositions, through the stories and legends around him, through the mythology. So you're trying to connect with what Kumarji might have attempted to connect all through his life. And that, by definition, is a little bit abstract process. So in that sense, I was saying you can't really, decide exactly so it's intentional, but it is also a bit of improvisation, a bit of open-endedness.
Okay, last question. Yeah.
Hi, hello. My name is Aarti. I just wanted to ask कि currently जैसे documentary की हम बात कर रहे हैं, तो is it still documentation of actuality or has it really gone beyond that? क्योंकि अब हमने फूल का छंद भी देखा, पायल मैम की भी फिल्म देखी आज, तो is it still एक तरीके का documentation of reality जहाँ पे जो real घटित हो रहा है आप उसको एक तरीके से कैप्चर कर रहे हैं, दर्शा रहे हैं, या has it gone much more beyond that now?
I think you answered your question, na? After seeing Phool Ka Chand and Payal's film, answer मिल गया ना?
हाँ, पर एक तरीके से बहुत जैसे वो भी देखा है, तो वो हुआ है कि it has kind of battled my own narrative of what it has been. So now I'm questioning that what is it actually? Is it just documenting or is it more than that?
More than that. No, not to be flippant, but yeah, I think the potential in the form is so much, and I think people are exploring it, and that's great, and you should too. if you are an aspiring or a current filmmaker, that you don't feel bound. It's okay to even make a simple film. It's okay to make a film with a simple 5 interviews also, if that's what you want to do. There's this beautiful film set in Kashmir. I don't know whether you've seen it. It has just 4 interviews. It's like a 70-minute film, and it's just the narratives of people, of 4 women in Kashmir, and it's like so moving. So there's nothing wrong with interviews, or it seems like so basic, but it's absolutely a stunning, moving film. It's something of an autumn, something it's called. I can't remember the name. So it's not that you have to do something gimmicky or grand or something. So the thing is, the field is open. You choose your own path. I think that's the beauty of it. So you can make something simple or something which is conventional also, but if you make it with a true heart and with an authentic soul, then it will come through, And otherwise, तुम कुछ भी drone उड़ा लो, कुछ नहीं होगा. हर film में drone उड़ाने की जरूरत नहीं है. That's one advice I want to give. The drone is also a tool, and the static shot is also a tool. So equally important, and you can choose either. You don't have to choose one or the other.
Thank you.
So, with your line, field is open, you choose your own path, I think we can conclude this session. Thank you so much for being and sharing your thoughts and your processes. It was wonderful interaction. I'm sure it must have helped you or just given you some insights. All the best for your next current films that you're making, and we would love to screen it here when you make it. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.